Hello? So, in the news recently, over the past few years, couple years actually, transgenderism, especially transgender athletes. Um, Been in the news for a while. Everyone's biased on it, including myself, I admit. So I decided, few articles came up which got me thinking about it as a topic. Looked some stuff up on it. Just going to go over. I'll come out from the beginning. I am biased about it. I am against it. I'll admit that from the start. I will give my reasons for being against it. See? Among other things, basically grew up. Men were men, women were women, the end. Um, right or wrong, that's the way I was raised. So far as am I being transphobic with this belief? I don't think so. I've seen nothing to convince me that I'm wrong. All the arguments in favor, no one's come up with a good argument to convince me I'm wrong. Just saying I believe I'm a woman or I believe I'm a man doesn't make you one. Um, I know that's not going to go over well with some people, but that's my belief, and I'm saying it now because, like I said, everyone's biased on this. I am biased on it. I'm admitting my bias from the start. And you can love me or hate me for it, but this is my point of view. I'm going to be honest about that from the start. Now, like I said, everyone's biased. I went online, looked up, found some articles on it because get the other point of view. And yes, I agree. I still am convinced everyone's biased. The pro-transgender arguments are not full of facts. They're more emotional based than anything else, in my opinion. So, of course, the anti-transgender arguments are also full of emotion too. I'm biased, but I'm not so biased that I'm going to let both one side off easier than the other here. So let's go off on a tangent before we come back to the athletes, which I started talking about. Religion. So, a lot of the arguments, of course, God created man and woman, blah, 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 blah. That's one of the arguments against it. And no, you don't have the right to force your religion on other people. But yes, it's still a reason to be for or against something in some cases. Because saying my religion's wrong is you trying to put your religion on me. That's not quite where I was going with this. So my original tangent was going to be, though, years ago, back in the early 90s roughly, prayer in school. Now, I'm a religious person. I believe in prayer. I don't believe it should be in schools. My main question is, why can't children pray at home? Wake up 5 minutes early, pray before you go to school, everyone's happy. There are some denominations of various religions where you have to pray. The more conservative denominations, you have to pray at a certain time every day. Devout Muslims pray 5 times a day at specific times. Jews pray at certain times before the Sabbath starts or after the Sabbath ends. So even Catholics had Vespers and Matins where they prayed at a certain time during the day. They don't do that these days, but it's still a more conservative Catholic might. So yes, there are some people who want to pray, who would have to pray at school due to the very conservative nature of their particular denomination. What about other people? Again, I say, why can't they pray at home? Do we want these schools getting so schools have screwed up other things. Sex education, I believe schools have screwed up. Parents should be teaching their kids about sex, not schools. Parents are too embarrassed to, so they don't. And like I said, I think these schools have screwed some of that up. So do we want schools screwing up religion by teaching prayer? No. But anyway, back in the early 90s, someone came up, okay, how about 1 or 2 minutes of silence during homeroom? If you want to pray, you can pray. If you don't want to pray, you don't have to. Sounds like a reasonable compromise. Everyone should be happy. Except everyone wasn't happy. The kids who don't want to pray, they'll feel uncomfortable having to be in silence waiting for the other kids to pray. And their discomfort is bad, and that's inflicting religion on them, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So, 5 or 6 years ago, transgenders using bathrooms became a big deal in schools. And people who are against it said, girls are going to be uncomfortable with boys coming in to use the bathroom. Now I say, like I said, I'm biased on this. I'm going to continue to say boy and girl for biological boy and biological girl. I'm not going to jump through hoops of saying transgender, man, whatever, trying to clarify. If I say boy, I mean biological boy. If I say girl, I mean biological girl. Same with man and woman. You know, if the situation calls for me being more specific, I will be more specific. Just to make the video simpler. But, okay, so girls are going to be uncomfortable with boys using the same bathroom. I mean, this was the exact same argument used to keep prayer out of school, you know, a moment of silence out of school, but suddenly it's hateful. So, like I said, nothing's been done to convince me, and the arguments made to support transgenderism contradict other arguments. You know, if it's hateful to say that a boy shouldn't use a girl's bathroom, then it's hateful to say that a moment of silence is religion or enforcing religion. You know, certainly, you know, a girl should have the right to feel uncomfortable if a boy comes into the bathroom. If a atheist has the right to feel uncomfortable if they're asked to be silent to allow other people to pray. So there's a double standard. So now we come back, you know, that was a few years ago. Now it's gone from transgender bathrooms up to transgender athletics, which I'm talking about today. Fallon Fox was the big one that started it all. Big one to make the media. Transgender, you know, man, wants to be called a woman, wants to be in women's mixed martial arts competitions. And apparently fractured a woman's skull in it. Now, boxing and martial arts and stuff like that can be violent, people can get hurt, but apparently this went well beyond anything that's happened before. And people argue that this was just a guy who liked to beat up on women. Not going to go that far myself. Don't know the guy's motives. Not going to read motives into it. However, I was raised that men aren't supposed to hit women. So just the idea of I want to be called a woman so I can participate in a woman's sport where I hit other women, it does make me feel a little uncomfortable. Not saying that was his motive, but it's still not quite 100% kosher in my mind. Of course, we've had other arguments of, you know, these are mediocre male athletes who want to compete as female because they are superior female athletes. Potentially, that is a potential logical argument in some cases. Not necessarily 100%, but in some cases, you got to accept that that's a possibility. Title IX, Equality for Women in Education. It's got a section dealing with sports because in order for women to get an equal education, they have to have equal funding. And as long as we're giving out sports scholarships, we got to give them both men and women. As a man, I am, yep, there are women who are better athletes than me, but as a man, I'm probably better than some women. Probably better than at least half women. So I could edge a woman out of a scholarship just because physical, you know, physical design. Not necessarily a better athlete, but I'm taller. I can reach things better than them. I can, you know, do things that they can't. You know, and I was not a great athlete as a man. When I graduated high school, I only weighed 120 pounds. No one questioned why I didn't play on the football team because I only weighed 120 pounds. Um, there are physical disadvantages that some people have. Physical advantages, physical disadvantages. It's a natural thing. We accept it all along until it comes to transgender athletes. When we say, okay, now this person, not because of simple genetics, but because of XY chromosome, has an advantage. Are we taking away the Title IX privileges of a woman, giving it to this man because he wants to claim to be a woman? I mean, it's a reasonable argument. Now, there was a high school volleyball team. I played volleyball. Played on my. We didn't have high school men's volleyball, but my youth group had a boys volleyball team. I played on it. I was fairly good. Again, there are women who could beat me at volleyball, but I was probably better than half the women volleyball players out there. And volleyball is something you can continue to do as you get older. It takes skills, takes stamina and ability and physical strength and stuff, but it's 6 people defending a relatively small area compared to other sports. You got few seconds between volley sets to rest, catch your breath. You're not constantly run. You're playing as a team. As a middle-aged man, I could still beat a lot of college girls at volleyball. Just, I was good enough, and the skills don't decline that much over time. So I could edge a woman out of a volleyball scholarship. Would I get a full ride? No, but I could still prevent a woman from being able to participate as much as others. So there was a high school volleyball team, girls volleyball, made it to the state champions. They had a trans man on their team. Now the girls felt uncomfortable changing in the same locker room as him. So they would go and they would change in the bathroom because that was the best solution they could come up where everyone would be happy. Made it to the champions. They were in the finals and or semifinals. I can't remember which. And they had to forfeit because the hosting school, the school that was hosting the competition, said, no, you aren't allowed to change in the bathrooms. We provide locker rooms. The team changes in the locker room. The end. So having a boy on the team suddenly got them kicked out of the finals or semifinals. I forget which. Now we could argue that having a boy on the team is how they got that far in the competition. I'm not sure. It goes either way. But in that case, it's a matter of, well, yes, there is an advantage. Boys shouldn't be allowed to play girls volleyball because they have an advantage. This is proof of it. Now, like I said, I played volleyball. So I looked up a few volleyball facts. For men's volleyball, so this would be outside of high school, but any age limit, any age range of volleyball, there is a difference in net size for men's and women's. So for men's volleyball, the net is 7 feet 11 inches, 7 feet 11 and 5/8 inches high. For women's volleyball, it is 7 feet 4 and 1/8 inch high. So it is a little over half a foot, I believe, a little over 7 inches difference in height. Biological women, average height is 5'2". Biological man, average height is 5'8". 6-inch difference. 6-inch difference in height, 7-inch difference in net height. It's almost as if the sport was designed around the average physical height of biological men and women. So the sport itself is inherently transphobic, if you want to go down that pathway, because it makes a difference between biological men and women. It's based on biological men and women's difference. Started looking up other sports trying to find these out and couldn't really find anything. Basketball rim is the same height for men and women. Everything else is apparently the same. Found Reddit. Someone put a question about archery. Why are there men and women's archery divisions? And someone answered. Their answer was, men and women compete separately in individual archery competition because men's scores are typically higher. For example, the new world records are 700 male and 673 female. This is in large part due to the men having higher arrow speeds. Higher speed leads to higher scores because higher arrow speed, less wind interference, plus more forgiveness for floor mistakes, as such men don't have to account for the wind as much or be as precise with their movements. They're still really precise though. So how do men get this higher arrow speed? Two major reasons. Longer arms, longer draw length, basically how far you can pull back the bow. Stronger muscles, able to handle higher draw weight, basically how much force the arrow leaves the bow with. So in conclusion, different physiologies require different categories. So there we go. Transgender, man to female, is still physiologically a man. And being such, he does have an advantage over someone who is physiologically a female. In archery, at least. As I went through, I did come across, are there any sports where both men and women can compete against each other? And the answer was equestrian sports. The horse is doing all the work. The physiological difference between men and women are almost negligible. So, again, it is inherent in sports that they are transphobic. They make differences for physiological men and physiological women. Now, interesting thing about this is one of the articles I wrote in favor of transgender athletes was by the American Civil Liberties Union. 4 myths about transgender athletes. And so they had their myth and their fact against the myth, and their facts weren't backed up by anything. They were more opinion than anything. The myths are also opinion, but one of their myths was about how transgender men have more advantage over women. Or men transgendering from men to women have more of, again, I don't know how to phrase it all completely because there's so much confusion over it. But, and their answer, the fact was in fact, they have a disadvantage because they have the psychological disadvantage. This one's sort of funny, because, go back, homosexuality was considered a psychological disorder for many years. Back in the 70s, the American Psychiatric or Psychological Institute, or whatever it's called, said no, it's no longer considered a disorder. And there have been arguments back and forth. It's homophobic to call it a psychological disorder. It's unreal to call it normal. Back and forth depending on which side you're on. So the ACLU, in support of transgenderism, is using it is a psychological disadvantage to be transgender. They have just kicked us back 50 years in time to the point where this is a psychological disorder. Their argument in favor of transgenderism is itself transphobic. So, go think about that. Now, found a New York Times article about this was run back in April of this year. One quote here. The NCAA decided last year to set its rules sport by sport and essentially follow guidelines set by major national and world governing bodies for each sport. This is defining transgender athletes. That means transgender college athletes are now required to undergo testosterone testing to compete in women's divisions. A move intended to put the NCAA in line with the U.S. organizations and that set standards for acceptable testosterone levels in their sports. Okay, I mean straight up, you're a man who wants to play a women's sport, you have to take a testosterone test. Now, one thing, they don't mention in the article, or no one else has mentioned, where are the transgendered women think they're men wanting to play men's sports? I mean, here, the article, the NCAA has set up a test for men to play women's sports. There is no test listed for women to play men's sports. And this goes back to the argument, people are making, well, they just want to play this sport because they have an advantage over women. And, a counter argument would be women playing men's sports, or wanting to play the men's division of that sport. From time to time, you'll hear, and by time to time, I mean less than once a year, you'll hear a story about a girl wanting to play on the high school football team. Of course, you got to remember that there really aren't any female football leagues, or there aren't a lot of them if they do exist. So that's a situation where if a girl wants to play the sport, she has to play on the boys' team. Most other sports, they have both man and, boys and girls divisions, man and women's divisions, and most women want to play in the women's division. There's not this big rush for women to play on the men's team. So, where are all the transgendered female-to-male athletes wanting to play on the men's team, if this is a natural thing? You don't see it. Interesting, the Equality Rights Campaign, I think it was called, had an article where, again, they're supporting transgender athletes. And one of the things they bring out is the testing. How it's unfair that a transgender athlete has to take a test because it's discriminating making them take a test. So they are actually calling for this testosterone level test to be done away with. And it does sound discriminatory, making some people take a test that other people don't. But on the other hand, if we eliminate the test, then now not only can I go out and play women's volleyball, I don't have to make any change in my life whatsoever. I just say, I think I'm a woman. And they can't question it. It's wrong for them to question it. They can't test me for it. I don't have to take any testosterone suppressors or anything like that. Because, if the Equal Rights Campaign has their say, they aren't allowed to test me for it. I think it was back in the 90s, there was an episode of Family Guy, I believe it was, where Peter Griffin makes the statement, I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body. It was a big joke. We're there now. I mean, it was a joke back then, and people say, that's a slippery slope argument. We're there now. I can claim to be a woman, play women's sports without being tested for it, without doing anything else. Can also claim to be a lesbian. Don't have to make any lifestyle changes. I can date women and still call myself a woman and not be tested, not take testosterone suppression. If the Equal Rights Campaign has their say, I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body, which was a joke back in the 90s, will be reality today. So, like I said, I'm biased, I admit it. I could be wrong. I'm not 100% wrong because I've just pointed out some reasons. We shouldn't just rush into this. Well, in the sake of equality, men should be able to play women's sports if they claim to be a woman. No, we should think this out at least. Even if I'm wrong in general principle, I am right in saying we don't just rush into it because people get emotional about it and, oh, we have to do this to be equal. We should think this out and say, what are the long-term consequences of this? And that's all I said. I know a lot of you are going to hate me for what I say, but, I backed it up, unlike some of these articles I've read. So, have a good day.